Okay, so that's running now, so we're good there. So if you want to put up your voice recording, just remember, don't minimize it after you hit record. Just like put it behind another window. Um, so if you guys got it up, we'll do the record in 3, 2, 1, and go. All right. Okay, so I'll do the lead in, and then I'll kick it over to Eric, introduce all that fun stuff. So sound good?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Hello, Dynasty Truthers, and welcome to another episode of the DLF Dynasty Podcast. No, this is not Jeff Miller. It is George Kritikos hosting this episode. And it's a very special one. We're post-draft, and we're going to be talking about IDP, individual defensive players. And with me tonight is Eric Ollinger. He is the lead IDP writer for DLF. Eric, did I say your last name right?
Nope, just thought we should have went over that. It was close enough. It's Ollinger, but you know.
Ollinger. All right. Well, good. You don't have to try to pronounce my last name. It's okay. So we'll just be on this like reputation of we just don't know how to pronounce each other's last names. That's cool. So why don't you start off, Eric, by telling us a little bit about IDP, you know, what it is, how, you know, players, maybe people who are listening, can get more involved with it. Like, what should they expect as they start to dive into that pool?
Well, quite simply, IDP is individual defensive players, whereas if you play on a Yahoo or an ESPN or any of the free basic type of platforms, you use a team defense, whereas in IDP, you use linebackers, defensive ends, defensive tackles, corner safeties, and so just like offense, where you have 7 to 9 starters, you'll have the same 7 to 9 starters on defense. So it's just a way to take your fantasy teams to the next level, and adds another layer to it, because if you are weak on offense and you're strong on defense, you can be in separate you kind of rebuild on the fly easier, to where if your roster kind of gets in a pickle, you can definitely get more points weekly to kind of offset if you're playing against a guy like Antonio Brown or DeAndre Hopkins that blows up. Now you've got more positions, more players per week to kind of level that playing field. So it higher points per week, more players. It just kind of takes that one player that killed you out of the equation. Unless you're playing against Antonio Brown and J.J. Watt, then just swallow it and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, that's that like true dynasty is with those kind of guys, getting them on both sides of the ball. So, Eric, talk to me a little bit, because you mentioned, there's cornerbacks, there's safeties, it's the entire defense. So talk to me a little bit about the starting lineups. You said 7 to 9 players is kind of a rough average type of IDP format. So do you mostly play in ones that separate out defensive ends versus defensive tackles? Do they tend to get blended into defensive lines, or do you kind of see a little bit of both?
You kind of see a little bit of both. Like as teams or as players dip their toes into the IDP waters, you'll catch starting lineup requirements that will be defensive line. So you'll have 3 defensive line, maybe 3 linebackers, 2 safeties, and 1 to 2 flex, where you can just play anybody, just like on offense. As you get into it a little bit deeper and you realize that there's maybe only 1 or 2 defensive tackles that are worth a crap, you'll smooth that a little bit to where you'll have to start 2 defensive ends and 1 defensive tackle, or 2 defensive tackles, whatever, just to kind of make that position matter. Same thing on the back end with the safeties and the corners. Corners are kind of the kickers of the defense of the IDP world. There's just so many corners in the league that even the elite ones aren't difference makers. So in the secondary, you want the safeties, you want the in-the-box safeties, or a guy that turnover-prone guy that snags balls and does a little bit of everything. Linebackers, man, it's all about the tackles. Unless you're in a sack, scoring system really matters. So unless you're in a league that rewards a lot for sacks, you want your inside linebackers, your Mike linebackers, your will linebackers that gobble up all the tackles. So.
Yeah, so it seems like with scoring, Eric, it seems like that varies a lot, right? So you're going to have ones that are a little more tackle heavy. You might have ones that are a little bit more big play heavy, like sacks or interceptions. So when you start thinking about those things, is that when the value of different players starts to fluctuate pretty greatly? Because with offensive type scoring, that tends to be, outside of PPR and non-PPR, things tend to stay relatively consistent.
Yeah, yeah. Outside of two quarterbacks, or now you're seeing more and more like points per carry leagues, which
That's a whole separate conversation, right?
right, right. So the big thing with IDP, whenever somebody comes to me and asks, what do I need to know? This is my first IDP draft. Know your scoring. Like you can't say it enough. You can't. You have to know what you're getting into, because if you're in a sack-heavy league, guys like Justin Houston and Tamba Ali, your big sack guys, all of a sudden become just as important as your Luke Kuechly's and Levante Davids. So you have to know your scoring system, and if sacks aren't very important, then those same guys that lead the league in sacks, like Von Miller, where he might not get a lot of tackles each week, all of a sudden like his value just bottoms out, and it's boom or bust. So if you're willing to take a 2-point week, just in case you don't want to miss out on that 22-point week, then you have to be willing to roll the dice. So it's all about balance, like especially in those kind of leagues, because you really want to couple him with the high tackle guy that will absorb that 2-point week, but really put you over the top if you have two guys that had eight solo tackles, and then Von Miller blowing up with 2.5 sacks and 4 tackles. So
yeah, you brought up Tamba Hali and some of these other pass rushing guys. Obviously, one of the big things has to be the positional eligibility, because unlike offense, you're not going to see Antonio Brown switch to running back randomly, but in the IDP world, it's possible that a defensive end gets reclassified as a linebacker, a safety as a corner, things like that. So can you talk a little bit about, one, how does that process actually happen? And two, how does that change some of your strategies when you think about some of these players?
Anytime there's a coaching change or a defensive coordinator change, IDP players hold their breath, because the worst was when Terrell Suggs was first coming up. Man, the Ravens seemed to be changing from a 4-3 to a 3-4 every year. Happened with Mario Williams too. It all comes down to what the team lists their base defense as, and then my fantasy league, which seems to be the industry standard for dynasty leagues, for good cause. My fantasy league uses Roto World's depth charts, so anytime that there's a change there, their system updates, and now Terrell Suggs is an outside linebacker, Mario Williams is an outside linebacker, and then now he went to Miami, and now he's a defensive end again. So that's the biggest gripe that everybody has with IDP, especially dynasty leagues. Obviously in redraft it doesn't matter because you don't have any sort of long-term investment. But it's one of those things. Anytime there's a coaching change, man, you got to hold your breath, because all of a sudden you have a top 5 defensive end that is now an outside linebacker, and he's a low-end linebacker 3. So your whole IDP roster can really change overnight.
You sound like you're speaking from experience, but we'll kind of leave that for the therapy session, that we'll do later. So why don't we start talking a little bit about the rookie draft and what happened this weekend? I'm sure everyone appreciates the IDP 101, but let's get into the more advanced class here. Let's bring on our guest, Mr. Adam Zekas. Adam, why don't you say hello to the people?
Hey, people.
Adam is one of the writers at DLF. He's one of our IDP writers. You can find Adam in many places, not just on DLF. He's on Twitter too. We'll make sure that you can connect with him later. But Adam, why don't you talk a little bit about your IDP background real quick, and kind of, maybe you can speak to kind of some of the scoring and some of the things that that come up with IDP.
Yeah, I guess I've been doing IDP now for about 5 years. I started off real slow, like a free league, just to mess around a little bit, and then I kind of ramped it up from there. Now I'm probably in mostly IDP leagues. Offense only has gotten kind of boring for me. but I tend to stick to IDP leagues that you start a lot of players, a lot of IDP players, usually 11, and they score very highly. Just because it kind of gives you, goes to what Eric was saying, it gives you like another chance to win. Maybe you have that guy who played the random wide receiver 4 who had 6 touchdowns, that 1 week, but you happen to have Fletcher Cox who had, 4 sacks. So it kind of helps you even it out, and you can really be pushed along by your defense, which is awesome. So I love it. It's been a great addition to fantasy.
Well, and you're a great addition to this episode, Adam. So already, look at that synergy.
I guess it's just the Greek thing. It must be it.
So why don't we hit on some of the different rookie landing spots, and let's maybe start, kind of positionally. I'm going to start it probably not as sexy and as exciting as the linebacker position, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with the defensive line. So I know 2017, coming in, or 2016 coming into the class, a lot of people were excited about the depth that existed from an NFL perspective. But guys, as you watched the draft, as you saw these players get drafted, who were some guys that you were keeping an eye on, and also, what were some landing spots that intrigued you early on? Eric, why don't you start?
Well, I mean, obviously the guy that you were watching at the beginning was just where Bosa would land, and you didn't have to wait very long. 3rd pick, he ends up in San Diego, and there was a little bit of debate on what position he was going to play, and even there was some argument on Thursday night about where he was going to end up at on Twitter and just on different sites. And right now they have him listed as a defensive end, which is where I think he belongs. I don't think you want to stand Joey Bosa up. So what I envision is I expect for him to line up as a defensive end, kind of in the mold of Justin Smith, and hopefully they'll get a pass rusher to line up on his outside shoulder and just kind of flood that end to where he can really wreak havoc. And then in obvious passing situations, they'll kick him inside. But I don't know if just because he's a white defensive lineman, but he gets compared to J.J. Watt, and that's not fair because he's not J.J. Watt. So I think expectations are a little ridiculous to where if he becomes a perennial 8-sack a year guy, that he's going to be viewed as a disappointment. But I think that he's one of those guys that's probably a better NFL player than maybe a fantasy player because he's going to really open things up for the other players around him. You agree, Adam?
Oh, definitely. And I completely agree with him being a defensive end. It would be really weird to see him as an outside linebacker. So he can make an impact. And no, he is not J.J. Watt.
Well, so Adam, another guy, Eric mentioned Justin Smith, but a guy who is basically coming in to more or less replace him in San Francisco is DeForest Buckner. So give me some thoughts on him and how you see him fitting now with the 49ers.
Yeah, it's a great spot for him. He's going to do really well, especially if he has a 5 technique, which is usually San Francisco. That's kind of what he's going to be, like you said, a replacement. But that gives him the opportunity to kind of be a pure pass rusher and just make havoc. He has great size. He's going to be able to put up really good tackle production, which is kind of rare for more of a 5 tech because they're kind of just like flying at the quarterback. But I can't wait to see his production because he can come in right away and kind of just put up some sacks. And I think for their line with their backer core, they're just going to let him just go crazy and run loose.
Yeah, as a 49ers fan, I'm a 49ers fan, so I get pissed a lot. But I was excited when they drafted Buckner, just reuniting with Eric Armstead and Chip Kelly. There's going to be a lot of familiarity to where the learning curve is going to be really softened, and I agree with everything that Adam said. Like, they're going to turn this guy loose, and he's just explosive, and he's strong against the run. He's going to be one of those 3-4 defensive ends that's going to matter, and kind of like in a Calais Campbell kind of mold, which is ironic because that's who Eric Armstead got compared to mostly. But, yeah, as a 49ers fan and an IDP player, like DeForest Buckner is definitely a guy I'm excited about.
So, and Eric, you had mentioned this earlier about defensive tackles. It's hard for them to always be very relevant. But, a few of them got picked kind of in that first and second round. You think of Vernon Butler to Carolina, Sheldon Rankins to New Orleans, Jaron Reed, who I guess technically can play defensive tackle or defensive end, but I assume he'd be a defensive tackle with Seattle. And I'm sure I'm missing a few, but are there any defensive tackles of interest out of this draft based on where they landed or just the talent that you're liking?
I mean, I like Butler in Carolina just because they have a very specific type of player that they like, and he definitely fits that mold. And it appears that they're planning for life after star Lotulelei, and so I mean he's not going to be one of those guys that's going to produce from day one, but he's an investment in deep defensive tackle leagues. Defensive tackles, it's just one of those things, like depending on how big your league is and what your starting requirements are, you might not have more than 12 to 15 defensive tackles rostered in your entire league. Kind of one of those things where if you don't have one of the elite top 4 or 5, you're kind of playing the matchup game from week to week, and borderline guys are getting held just because you have to start one. But a lot of times it's when their bye week comes up, sayonara, let's find a different guy that's comparable.
What about you, Adam? Is there anyone else who sticks out, either defensive tackle or even any of the other ends that were drafted kind of in the first few rounds?
Somebody who I really like their tape of, probably their highlight reel a bit more, was Robert. I'm going to mess up his last name. It's like Nimdiche. Yeah, he was drafted by Arizona. He kind of has some character concerns, which kind of explains why he fell to the end, the second to last pick of the first round. But this guy can be a monster. He's a little raw, which is fine. I mean, these are rookies. But I think next to Campbell, like we mentioned before, and they brought in Chandler Jones as well, I think that he's just going to be really good with a little coaching. If you give him some time to progress and maybe takes a few plays off, you get him really committed, really focused. I think he's going to be a really great player for them, especially on a team that has great linebackers, good safeties. I mean, he's even from the defensive tackle position, he's going to have freedom to kind of do what he needs to do to make impact plays. And at the end of the first, I thought that was great value for them.
Yeah, it seemed like he got. It seemed like he got a lot of like Darnell Doggett type of comparisons because of the landing spot, and that he is a disruptive guy. Is that a fair comparison, Eric, or do you think that he's maybe getting put in a little bit of a tough situation there?
No, I think that's fair, but I'm just curious: can a live panther survive in the desert? Like, is that their sort of because the dude said the first thing he's going to buy is a live panther. So, character concerns might not even scratch the surface of this guy. But, the same thing like Jared Allen was a knucklehead. He was a weirdo too, and, he hung around. So, actually landing in Arizona was probably one of the best places for him because Patrick Peterson's there, and, he was able to mentor Tyrann Mathieu, who has now become a model citizen. So I think those two guys are basically going to keep this kid in line and basically make sure that he's not out buying live panthers and, building an ark in the desert for some reason. But I think the best case scenario for him is kind of like what we talked about with DeForest Buckner is you put Kimdichie and Chandler Jones on the same side and make offenses pick their poison on who they're going to block. And one of those guys should have, a one-on-one matchup. And Kimdichie he's not short on talent, he's just short on brain, and Chandler Jones is legit. So, you put both those guys on one side and Calais Campbell on the other side, and Deion Buchanan in the middle. It's the defense is going to be legit. So, he's in a great landing spot, man.
So let's shift over. Let's talk about the linebackers a little bit. So. Obviously, the biggest story was just the massive slide that Myles Jack had, going from being pretty much a consensus top 5 to top 7 pick to falling all the way to the second round, falling to Jacksonville, who, if he is healthy, may have gotten 2 of the best defensive talents out of this draft. And I know that Scott Peak wrote something earlier on DLF regarding Myles Jack and his knee situation, and then I think Dr. James Andrew came out and said, oh no, he doesn't need a microfracture surgery, he's fine, but that was like the day after he slid out of the first round. So, Adam, I'll start with you. what do you think of, one, Jack in Jacksonville, and two, are you still concerned about kind of the knee situation and everything?
I think I'm actually going to start there because I have a bit of a bone to pick with Miles Jack. From what I heard, he took a $5 million insurance on if he didn't go in the first round. So I guess he kind of was able to get that. And I also heard that he was the one who told someone that he may need microfracture surgery. So I don't know what's going on there, but if you look at just his on-the-field play, I mean, this is I mean, I don't know if it could be considered a better spot, especially if they were considering taking him in the first round at pick 5. So he's going to have a great impact here. He's a phenomenal player. He's just he's very smart, very athletic. He has really good downhill speed, which is nice to catch up on people and to get into the backfield. Great lateral quickness. On with Malik Jackson and Dante Fowler now, they're going to be able to free him up to get to the ball carrier, and maybe even he's going to be finding coverage. So I think it's a first-round pick in the second round, and I'm not really too worried about his knee from an IDP perspective. Linebackers are pretty quick to be cycled out. If you get 4 or 5 good years from him with maybe like linebacker 1 or 2 production, that's just great. I mean, that you can't really ask for better. If he's the first linebacker taken in a IDP rookie draft, I wouldn't even question it over some of the other offensive players.
What do you think, Eric, as far as Jack and kind of where you're valuing him now, and then if you want to transition to another guy who was in the second round in Jalen Smith going to Dallas and his knee issues?
Yeah, the thing about Jack, man, I heard that same thing about the insurance policy, but I also heard that he had to fall past like pick 45. So who knows what's true? But I think a lot of these athletes kind of take, especially the elite ones, that go back for another year. They take those things out. And but from an IDP standpoint with Jack, it's a crowded group right now because they brought Posluszny back, and Kelvin Smith is one of the top IDP linebackers already, and they have a well-stocked secondary. So if this defense ends up being as good as advertised, where are all these tackle opportunities going to come from? So if Miles Jack starts at Sam where he's currently projected on the strong side, and Paz is in the middle and Telvin at weak side, who comes off the field in passing situations? My guess is, at the beginning, probably Jack until that knee's 100%, and then you would think that you'd want to keep the athleticism on the field with Telvin and Jack. So it's definitely a long-term thing. I think it was smart and lucky to have Jack fall to him in the second round and be able to keep him as Paz kind of fades off into the sunset, and then make a seamless transition. And then the Jacksonville, man, they killed it. Like, they killed the draft as far as defensive defense goes. They even picked up Sheldon Day from Notre Dame as an undrafted free agent on the defensive line. So I mean, the ability to keep their second level clean is pretty impressive. And then Dallas, man, like, I'm a Notre Dame fan too. So like, and I'm sure everybody's seen it on Twitter if they follow me. Like, I was rooting hardcore for Jalen Smith. The dude's just one of like the greatest human beings, man. Like, he's not, he's everything you'd want for your locker room. And talent-wise, man, like, he gets compared to fairly to Patrick Willis. I mean, he brings a lot of the same sort of on-field talent as Willis did. And landing in Dallas, even though some people, a lot of people are calling it a reach, there was rumors that New England was ready to pounce on Jalen as well. So it's just, Dallas with their linebacker situation, Sean Lee is always hurt. Rolando McClain seems to be suspended 4 games every year. So it's, he's the future. I don't know if he's the future at the middle or on the weak side. I guess it just kind of depends on the health of Sean Lee. But, Dallas's doctors are the ones that done the surgery on Jalen Smith, which I didn't know about until this weekend. So that's pretty cool. I mean, nobody knows that knee better than them, obviously. So until that nerve wakes up, I mean, you're kind of in a holding pattern. But kind of like what we've seen with Peyton Manning, once that thing, once it wakes up, it's all systems go. And it's I was rooting for the guy. So even as a Niners fan, I'm contemplating on buying a Cowboys jersey, which makes me puke in my mouth.
So let's talk about two more guys. So Darren Lee goes to the Jets. Reggie Ragland falls to the second round, goes to Buffalo. Are you guys both still bullish on both of them, or do you feel like fit is going to be an issue for either one of them and their new teams? I'll start with you, Adam.
I think I'll go halves on here. Well, I do like them both, but I think Ragland, being drafted as an inside linebacker, that's kind of where he has been playing, his whole career. So I think it's going to be a really nice fit for him to a great stat crew, which is important, and an easy opportunity to play. I think they did bring in Zach Brown from the Titans to help out their linebacker core, but I don't think Preston Brown is really up for the challenge of being a strong fantasy producer for you. He's good on volume. I think I saw somewhere he had like 1,000 snaps, which is kind of insane. So I think Ragland can kind of come in and get the volume and bring a lot of talent. Use Darren Lee to the Jets. They are very weak in their linebacker after letting Devontae Davis, or however, one of the Davises, letting him go. I was very surprised at that. But Lee brings a lot of presence there, whether he's on the weak side, where he should be, or if they do bring him over to the strong side. He's a little bit small, but I think he's good at filling gaps, and he's very good in coverage, which in today's NFL is extremely important.
What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I like Darren Lee in New York. I think, he got compared to Deion Buchanan of the Cardinals. They're both 6'1". Buchanan's 211, making the transition from safety to a full-time inside linebacker. Lee's 6'1", 232 pounds, and the dude's lightning quick, man. Ran a 4.47 at the combine, had 11-foot, 1-inch broad jump. I mean, he's explosive. He's a sideline-to-sideline stalker. He's just one of those guys who's going to be able to, cover running backs, play well against the tight ends. But he should just be a tackling machine, and he's probably at or near the top. He's definitely in the top 2 or 3 IDP rookies this year. Reggie Ragland, Buffalo's still claiming that they're going to run a 4-3 defense, so fingers crossed that stays true for Shaq Lawson and Reggie, because if Reggie plays in the middle there, that's something he's familiar with, and you keep more traffic off of him. So he should be a tackling machine. I agree with what Adam said about Zach and Preston Brown. They're replacement level talents, but Ragland should definitely be the benefactor of all that.
Well, so you guys mentioned a little bit. I know, Eric, you just mentioned Deion Buchanan, and so one of the guys, and technically he has played both linebacker and safety. This will be my very soft transition into the secondary, which I know you guys are super excited about. But Sua Cravens goes to Washington, and he's kind of gotten that, he'll be a Deion Buchanan type, maybe a dime linebacker. Is there any interest in Sua Cravens, and are there actual safeties that we should be excited about? And I'll start with Eric on this one.
We're kind of in a holding pattern and playing the waiting game with Sua Cravens, because if he gets labeled as a safety, then his value is going to skyrocket, because he'll be playing, and he truly does play the Deion Buchanan role. Then he'll get to play linebacker snaps, and you'll get linebacker opportunities, which, really catapult you to the top of safety rankings. It's the same thing with Buchanan last year, which is where all these comparisons are coming from. And then Mark Barron of the Rams, when he signed after leaving Tampa, or after he was traded, he was listed as a safety, but he was playing weak side linebacker snaps. So the guy was, averaging like 8 tackles a week. And, it was kind of one of those IDP loopholes. And, so all of a sudden you're getting, safety 1 numbers out of a linebacker 3-ish. So if Cravens gets that tag as a safety, then it's one of those loopholes that you're going to be able to exploit a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. Don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think I think I was calling him like the reverse Buchanan, because instead of going from safety to linebacker, could go from linebacker to safety, which would be like just fantastic, because those kind of sneaky plays are what make IDP really fun. But one safety that I definitely love his landing spot is going to be Keanu Neal. Some people don't really like his style, but he's kind of like a torpedo out there. He's just flying around all over the place. And I think the Falcons were dying for some safety help out there. So that's somebody that I'm probably going to be overdrafting a lot. He's out of Florida, and he's just a vicious hitter. I mean, he flies around and takes out running backs left and right. Going to probably get a lot of forced fumbles. I think he can, if he works on knowing when to go in shoulder first or when to just wrap up. He could probably be a pretty good impact player right out the gate for IDP, which is very nice.
I made my notes on Keanu Neal, which I agree with. I like him in Atlanta also. Immediately becomes the second most popular Keanu, behind only Key and Peele's cat, but ahead of Keanu Reeves. So
perfect.
Day 1 starter at strong safety behind a leaky front 7. I mean, the tackle opportunities are going to be there. So I completely agree. I mean, Keanu Neal is definitely a guy you want on draft day.
Yeah, it seemed like there were a few different safeties who went to teams that were at least a little bit needy for them. I mean, Carl Joseph goes pretty early. I believe it was pick 14 to the Raiders. Von Bell went to New Orleans, who seems like they're perpetually looking for bodies for their secondary. TJ Green goes to Indianapolis. And I mean, I guess Jalen Ramsey, but Jalen Ramsey's probably playing corner in Jacksonville. Are we excited about any of these other safeties out there?
Joseph in Oakland is a solid one. He's already listed as their starting strong safety, but of course, we don't have helmets and pads yet. But he'll play in the box with Reggie Nelson playing center field. Kind of similar to what I said about Jacksonville, though, with this defense that's turning into a real force on paper. With Malcolm Smith, Khalil Mack, Bruce Irvin, like if this defense is truly effective, how many opportunities is he going to get? So, still excited about him. One of the other guys I was excited about, and I was really surprised that he didn't get drafted, was Jeremy Cash, and out of Duke, ended up signing with Carolina, so kind of gets to stay at home. Right now the only thing that he's got to fight and steal from is Trey Boston, and who's Trey Boston? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. So Duke Cash is just he's a beast against the run. In the box enforcer. Would be shocked that if he's not the starter, by week 1 or shortly thereafter. Now that I say that, he'll probably get cut. But another guy in Detroit, Miles Killebrew, he has some sleeper appeal. Another inside the box guy, really looks to lay the wood, but he needs to improve his coverage skills. Could play pretty well next to Glover Quinn, who's just kind of an average guy. Do you have any interest in either one of those guys, Adam?
I wish you could see me, because I was emphatically shaking my head yes to Jeremy Cash going to the Panthers. I was shocked when I saw that he wasn't drafted. He can be very good. And as an undrafted free agent signing for them, I mean, they don't have to waste any draft capital. It's just a player they can just pick up, and that's awesome. I would love to be. If I was a Panthers fan, I'd be very happy about that. Killebrew too. I think he's one of those guys who lines up on the line more than he does behind the linebackers. So he's someone who can fly around. This safety class, I don't think there wasn't that many names, and I think they left a lot of teams that were kind of still missing out on a good safety.
Yeah, which kind of just surprised me even more about Cash. Like, it's almost to the point where you expect to hear something negative come out about him, where maybe maybe, the dude likes his weed, maybe he's got a little bit of an ankle issue, or just something. Like, there's one of those guys, he had enough hype going into the draft that you would have thought that he would have got picked somewhere.
Maybe he was planning to buy a panther or something, And
Right.
now look where he is, right?
I think it was a tiger.
So now that we've kind of touched on all the positions a little bit, let's talk about value in terms of, as you're thinking about rookie drafts, you're thinking about IDP drafts. Who are a few guys, whether it's guys that we've named or maybe other guys out there, who are a few that you feel like right now, based on your gut, are rising up your draft board a little bit? How about you, Adam?
You mean rookies or?
Rookies.
Rookies. Definitely Shaq Lawson in Buffalo as defensive end. I mean, I think he's going to could push for DL2 in this class behind Bosa, which would be nice to follow along with. I think Cravens is, a guy you just really want to get on board now because he's has a chance to blow up. From some of the deeper guys, Scooby Wright was a 7th round pick, and he was really popular coming in. Not crazy big, but I think he can make a play for the inside spot, or because some people don't like Kevin Minter, some people do, but another inside linebacker there to play next to Buchanan. I like Nick Vigil, who went to the Bengals. I like to call him Bick Vigil sometimes, just for my own reasons. But he could push very quickly for an inside spot. They have Ray Maluga and Vincent Ray. I guess the Ray brothers. Neither of them are really that great. They're kind of just been wasting their time there.
And one more. Interrupt you, but
oh, sure, go ahead, please.
Ray Maluga cannot get out of my life fast enough.
Please, I agree. I think Vincent Ray was someone that I had too much of, so I'm all about them both being replaced. Yeah, I guess just one more guy, Blake Martinez, who was drafted by the Packers. I think he played both in college. I don't know if he was a purely inside or purely outside linebacker. He played for Stanford, but that's a spot where they tried to move Clay Matthews over there into the middle, and it did not work out very well. They ended up putting him back. They drafted Jake Ryan at pretty much the same exact spot that they drafted Blake Martinez, and Martinez is a much better athlete. He was one of the top performing linebackers at the combine, so that's definitely someone who you can draft in the later rounds, 5th, 6th rounds of a rookie draft, and he might surprise.
Yeah, it seems like for the last 3 or 4 years, people have just been banging the drum for the Packers to draft an inside linebacker in the first round, whether it was Ragland this year or, when last year I think they picked, I can't think of the kid's name, but the cornerback safety that they picked in the first round and people were screaming. But, they actually picked 2 linebackers. They picked Fackrell as well. I think he's going to play outside. But that's a really good list, Adam. What about you, Eric? Is there anyone you want to add to that in terms of guys that have kind of piqued your interest a little bit more now after this draft process?
Yeah, it was like Adam was reading my notes on Scooby Wright and Blake Martinez. I agree with both of those guys. And Blake's kind of more of situation over talent, in my opinion, because Sam Barrington and Jake Ryan, they're not elite. So, he definitely has some opportunity. But I agree with what Adam said on both of those players. One of the Tyler Matakevich.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tyler Matakevich in Pittsburgh. He was taken in the 7th round. His first hurdle is going to be making the team, but if he does, he's not the most talented guy on the field, but he might be the smartest with the best instincts. And he's one of those guys that nobody's going to outwork. Probably going to start his career as a special teamer, but somewhat similar to Green Bay, Pittsburgh tends to move Lawrence Timmons around to wherever they need him, inside, outside, kind of a jack-of-all-trades linebacker. And Ryan Shazier, even though he's uber talented, can't seem to stay on the field. And so Matakevich, he's just one of those solid guys, and he's one of those guys you're not going to spend a lot of draft capital on. You can get him, pennies on the dollar. And then another guy, I don't know if he quite meets the criteria or not, but I think he's going to strongly outproduce his draft slot, is Leonard Floyd in Chicago. He is literally the perfect fit for Vic Fangio's defense. Similar to Alden Smith, just really explosive, freak athlete who explodes off the ball. Could flirt with double-digit sacks as a rookie, as a guy that comes in as a situational pass rusher. Definitely going to be one of those boom or bust weekly plays, but they're going to learn pretty quick that you can't keep this guy off the field. And then playing across from Pernell McPhee is definitely going to do nothing but help him. So you're definitely going to want him on your IDP teams.
Well, that's good because I'm a Bears fan and he's on my real team, so it's good that you say those things. I'm glad. I just hope he doesn't end up like the personal life of Alden Smith. He just kind of sticks to football Alden Smith only. So one name that I don't think any of us mentioned, and he went pretty early, was Deion Jones to the Falcons. Do we think that he's a guy who could potentially be a good value for IDP drafters, or is he someone who maybe is a little bit more athleticism than he is necessarily production? What do you think, Eric?
It seems Paul Werlo is he's the poster boy for situation over talent. He's Twitter's punching bag, but the dude responds to tweets, which makes it even better. And so, I mean, there's not going to be a whole lot of fight for him to get into the starting lineup or to have opportunity. He's definitely one of those guys that he doesn't have the name recognition necessarily. So I think that his production should outweigh his draft slot. So anytime that you can get that, I think you're on the right side of it.
All right. What about on the opposite side? Let's get a little pessimistic. Who are some guys that maybe not necessarily are falling off your boards or anything, but who are guys that are at the very least like you're feeling a little less excited about, Adam?
Oh yeah. Well, I have one. For some reason I don't know how I fell in love with Kentrell Brothers, but he was an inside linebacker, and he was very good, very instinctual player. He's not crazy fast, but he was able to react quickly to plays, and sometimes from a linebacker, especially in college, that's really all you need to make an impact. But he was drafted by Minnesota, and I don't know if there's really a worse spot for a linebacker to be picked than Minnesota right now. They have so many good players, not only a linebacker, but they have Harrison Smith in the secondary, and they have a pretty with Hunter and Linval at the line. He's dead. He's dead to me. So that's definitely a player that I'm no longer going to be drafting for me.
What about you, Eric? Is there someone who sticks out to you as far as maybe someone you're not quite as excited about now?
Yeah, Kevin Dodd getting drafted by the Titans. It's one of those things that we talked about earlier. Going to a 3-4 defense, he's now going to be an outside linebacker. And that pretty much torpedoes his IDP appeal. He's one of those guys that you wanted to go to a 4-3 team. Like he was mocked heavily to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a lot, who ended up taking Noah Spence. So like if you could flip those guys, you think that it would be better for both of them. But I do like Spence in Tampa, so I'm not like being on that parade. But Kevin Dodd went from one of those guys that should have been a top 5 rookie defensive end to one of those stash and hope guys in Tennessee.
Definitely I agree. That's a weird one. I know Emmanuel Ogbah was a guy who went to Cleveland and probably playing outside linebacker there, but I think everyone knew that was going to happen. I don't think too many people were mocking him as a defensive end, unlike Dodd, right, who kind of had a little bit of both.
Right. And the other guy, like Jalen Ramsey's going to get overdrafted. People's going to assume that he's going to play. They see that hybrid safety corner thing, and Jacksonville secondary's deep at safety, and they're wet paper towel weak at corner, so he's going to be a corner, and even the best corners aren't really all that great in IDP, so someone's going to take him earlier than they should. So
Yeah, that's a good segue, man, because I was going to ask, when we talked about some of these key guys, we've been talking about different positions, Ramsey, safety or corner, Bosa, defensive end, linebacker, Keanu Neal, I think we brought up a little bit, and there was some, does he end up getting a linebacker designation at some point? Shaq Lawson, are there any other guys that you're worried about from like a positional eligibility standpoint outside of the guys that we mentioned, Eric?
I think we've pretty much touched on most of them already. You just mentioned Ogba, like he's going to be an outside guy. Kimdichi's going to be a defensive end. Um, Dodd, obviously, just talked about him being an outside guy. Cravens is really the main guy that we kind of have to wait and see whether or not that we get to, work that loophole a little bit on a safety playing linebacker. And then I think the rest of them are pretty cut and dry, actually, assuming that San Diego doesn't do something crazy and throw Bosa on the outside. But I mean, their initial depth chart has him a defensive end where he belongs, in my opinion. So,
Yeah, no, I agree
by
there.
Adam.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Von Bell, who's drafted the Saints, I don't really know if he. I read a lot that he could be a corner, so I think maybe that's someone to keep in mind because he's great press corner and keeps sticking with guys. So since they have Kenny Vaccaro and Jarius Byrd when they decide to play, that may be someone who might get some sort of weird designation. But I think it's more of like an overarching strategy to if there are guys who either played outside linebacker in college or just seem fitted better for an outside linebacker position and they are a defensive end, be careful because things change really quickly. And if there's someone, if you have a start 2 defensive end league and you have this guy penciled in as your starter and he gets a new defensive coordinator and they decide to change to a 3-4 instead, you might be hurt. So I wouldn't say knock guys down your draft board, but definitely keep it in mind when you're doing your rookie drafts. And I guess just IDP in general tip.
Yeah, I think all 3 secondary players that the Bears drafted were safety corner hybrids. So, I'm just glad that the Bears are picking anyone, but I'm afraid of all of them. So why don't we talk? Go
Kind of
ahead.
makes sense though with Fangio though. He wants a secondary to hit. So if you have a nickel back that can lay the wood, that's going to be nothing but beneficial for them. So he has a type of player, man. Like I think you're gonna be happy as a Bears fan on defense.
Well, yeah, you mentioned Floyd, who I thought was a slight reach, but I was very happy they got him nonetheless. So let's talk a little bit. Let's switch gears here in terms of the teams. What were there any teams that you noticed who maybe failed to address a certain position? Was there a spot where you said, "Oh, this is a really clear need. This is a replacement level player," but for whatever reason they didn't really go after it, Adam?
I think there's 2 big ones that kind of jumped out to me. The Broncos not taking a linebacker in the draft at all, I thought was very interesting. They do have Brandon Marshall, who surprised me this year. I thought he was kind of a one and done after a very good 2014, but he was a good linebacker this year, and he put up good points and was a nice way to pick up the slack from the line. I would also look at Todd Davis, the linebacker from the Broncos, because he's going to get some starts, and that's someone who most people don't know about. He's not a very flashy name. And then Kenny Anunike in super deep leagues. That's a spot that you can kind of mine some value over. My other one that was huge for me was San Diego not taking any safety help to replace Weddle, who they kind of just said, we're not taking you back on this plane, so you're now no longer on the team. So they have Jaleel Adai and Dwight Lowry, who's like maybe 85 now. So I think that's a position, it's a team that skipped real hard on picking up a safety, and Adai is going to be someone who, in my opinion, is very nice to pick up late. That's going to be able to be a starter for you in your IDP league. They decided to. There were other safeties that went after their picks that they could have picked up, who were pretty good. So I think it shows a lot that they are confident in Adai.
What about you, Eric? Is there any other spots other than what Adam mentioned that you kind of were a little surprised that wasn't addressed in the draft?
Yeah, he mentioned Todd Davis for the Broncos. He's one of those guys that I've stashed toward the end of last year with the anticipation of either Trevathan or Marshall, not coming back. So let's try to keep that guy as a little bit of a secret for a while. But the other thing, man, is like how long are the Giants going to just punt the linebacker position? There was so many opportunities to take. Like it's not like they're week of one. Like they don't have. Like they barely have warm bodies at any of the spots. Like when you're rolling out Keenan Robinson, Jonathan Casillas, and Devon Kennard, like who you can't even figure out who's going to be calling the plays and wearing the dot because they all three are just below average NFL talent. They're all crap. And
you can't forget Unga. Unga Ungai.
I already did. And so they go out and they spend all this money on Olivier Vernon. They have Jason Pierre-Paul and his half a hand. So and then Snacks Harrison, Jonathan Hankins, the defensive tackle. So they're pretty they're solid up front. Butter soft in the middle, and then trying to make up for it a little bit on the back end. But that's one of those positions like you assumed that they were going to take one of them. Like Ragland was mocked to them heavily in the first round, and he obviously didn't go there. But that's the head scratcher. That's the biggest head scratcher. And then with the Packers just kind of like right behind it, waiting so long to address that, and then same deal with the linebackers. But those were my two big ones.
Yeah, I thought the 49ers were another one that I was surprised and go after like an inside linebacker at some point in this draft. It seemed like they were pretty content with sticking with what they have, which I don't even know how many of them are unretired at this point, but it doesn't matter.
You got me beat, George.
What's that?
You got me beat, George. Bringing up all the retirement talks, man.
Can't really talk about Borland. It's a super sore subject for people.
Patrick Willis, that was my dude, man. Like it's still my dude, but that one hurt more than anything.
Yeah, I agree. So on the flip side, we had some teams fail to address something. There were also some kind of unexpected picks. I think one that got mentioned earlier is Vernon Butler to Carolina. It was a little bit unexpected. I know that both their defensive tackles are coming up on contracts. So maybe it's a bit of an insurance move, but it still was a little surprising they invested such a high pick on the position. Was there anywhere else where you thought, this was a bit of a strange pick? How does that impact the starter, that type of thing? I'll start with you, Eric.
Well, I mean, touch on the Carolina deal. Like this is, really his Dave Gettleman's first draft where he wasn't handcuffed because of the salary cap from the previous general manager. So, I had a conversation with Derek Willett. He used to be a DLF writer, big time Panthers fan, and but I was kind of scratching my head a little bit about them taking Butler. But with Kawan Short and Star Lotulelei, it's definitely one of those things. They run that heavy defensive tackle rotation, and then if things get out of hand on the contracts, they're prepared for life after. So so it makes sense. That team made it to the Super Bowl, so they seem to kind of have something figured out. But do it again.
Success is the easiest way, right, to get a few extra chances. Like people don't have to question you as much then. What about you? What about you, Adam? You got anybody?
Definitely Vernon Butler. I mean, but I have like two more, maybe, I guess. It was weird. This draft, it seemed like people were just kind of taking need and not really. There wasn't, I don't know, maybe because it was less talented, but a deeper draft. There wasn't any BPA that kind of just blew someone's starter spot up. I guess maybe just Butler because they've spent now 2 firsts and a second on interior linemen. So that's kind of crazy for there. I mean, they've kind of rocked with to move over to transition a little bit. Buffalo, I mean, Ragland was a great pick, but there's someone they were fine with Preston Brown last year. They let Bradham go, so I thought it was kind of interesting there. And maybe just a little cornerback talk. The Vikings drafted another cornerback super early to go along with other first-rounders, Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes. So that was very surprising to me and anybody who follows the Vikings, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, that was an interesting one because Alexander at that point in the draft was a pretty good pick. It's just it's going to the Vikings that was a little bit strange.
Well, same thing with the Bengals. Like I think they got caught on the outside looking into the wide receiver run in the first round. Back to back to back receivers, and I think they just panicked and drafted a corner. And Adam mentioned earlier just Control Brothers going to the Vikings. Like that seemed like kind of a bit of a head scratcher. And then another guy, Josh Perry, going to the Chargers. It seems like the team has soured on Manti Te'o, and Perry's gonna be one of those guys to play next to Perryman, Denzel Perryman, and he might start as a rotation player before taking over for Te'o after the season, or maybe he wrestles that job away a little sooner. But San Diego going to the well and drafting another inside linebacker while ignoring the safety position, that one kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah, and it seemed like you mentioned Jackson the third, and I think that's a great example. I think Eli Apple with the Giants had the same thing, where it was like it seemed like the Giants were rumored to either go after Conklin or go after Leonard Floyd, and then it seemed like they just kind of got sniped both times, teams trading up, getting their guy, and then they're like, oh crap, we got to pick somebody. We only have 10 minutes, and they're like, all right, let's go with a corner. That seems good. So it's a little weird.
Losing Prince and Mukamara, I mean, it definitely, like, there was a void there. So, I mean, it wasn't like a,
complete shock.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we'll wrap up with a few last questions. So we'll kind of summarize everything that's happened here today. So if I'm putting you under the gun, and I'll start with you, Adam, who would be your first IDP pick right now, just based on what you know today? And where would you take him in a mixed offensive-defensive draft?
I would take Bosa, I think, first pick. In most leagues, defensive ends are probably a little harder to come by. I think good ones. And where would I take him? That's a tough question because there's so many different variations on the IDP theme. I'm actually I just did a rookie draft, and I only had 2 picks in the second, so I ended up taking Bosa with my first pick at 207, which happened to be in front of Jordan Howard. So that may have been a bit of a misstep, but it's a start 2 DE, no flexes league, so it was an important spot for me that I feel like I wanted a playmaker right away. So I think with the way when you're in a mixed combined rookie offense and defense draft, the offense kind of shores up a little bit. It's kind of tough slogging a little bit with this class. So I think for a savvy IDP player, it's in like a mixed league, which most are, you're going to be able to get some really great value.
What about you, Eric? Who would be your top guy right now? Is it Bosa or is it somebody else?
It's somebody else. At DLF, we're doing some of the IDP guys are doing a 2016 rookie top 75 offensive and IDP list. So I've been working on that today, and my first IDP off the board would actually be Darren Lee of the Jets. I think that just his versatility, scheme versatility, is going to keep him on the field, and he's just one of those guys that seems like he's going to be able to rack up the tackles, but he's so athletic that I think that he's going to be one of those guys that they're going to be able to really let him pin his ears back and attack. So he seems to have a relatively high floor, but also seems to also have that high ceiling. And but I don't have Bosa too far behind him. Actually, 4 spots below him, I have Darren Lee, Miles Jack, back to back, and then Bosa just 2 picks later. And then.
So where do you have, just out of curiosity, where do you have Lee situated in that rankings? Like what position spot do you have him at right now?
Where do I have him ranked, like numerically?
Yeah, numerically.
Yeah, he's my 14th, so I would take him at the top of the second round.
Okay.
And I mean, it's one of those things that like that's pretty fluid. So like if your team is in dire need, like you could sneak him into the end of round 1, and you wouldn't be reaching. But it's more than likely the second round's kind of where IDP live, barring some sort of elite talent. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and that's kind of the general rule of thumb that I've heard, kind of over the last couple of years. I know that a couple of our IDP buddies are pretty strong on the no drafting IDP players in the first round of a mixed draft. So what about a guy maybe who's a little bit deeper, someone that you're maybe watching, even if you're not necessarily drafting him because you're not quite there yet with him? Who's someone that you would tell people, hey, just keep an eye on this guy for right now because there could be something there, Eric?
Well, we've talked a lot about him tonight. It's Sua Cravens. I mean, it's just, he's one of those guys, like I said, kind of fall in that loophole of the Deion Buchanan and the Mark Barons where, you can just get extreme value. So that's really the big one, I guess. The other guy is Josh Perry, who we just talked about. He's more of a stash and hold. And Scooby Wright in Cleveland, even though he's a seventh rounder, he's coming off an injury, and that team's void of talent basically everywhere. So they call it the factory of sadness for a reason.
What about you, Adam? Who do you got?
I don't know what this is. I don't think this really counts, but Jalen Smith, definitely keep an eye on every single news thing you hear about him up to the minute that you're on the clock, because he's can be an impact player for your team. And if you have the insulation at linebacker, I would definitely be okay with overdrafting him all the time, and I probably will. So that's just somebody to keep an eye on. As for like lesser known players, Antonio Morrison, who was drafted by the Colts in the 4th round, I think may see some starting role or some so just like a coming off the bench player. So a
Meaningful
rotational
playing
player.
time.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
for. Yeah, a rotational player to get in there. Jarrell Freeman, not getting any younger. So that could be it's a good player to watch, and definitely just keep an eye on snap counts in season, and you'll find someone. There's always someone who comes out of nowhere.
And
All right.
we talked about him, but don't sleep on Jeremy Cash in Carolina, undrafted. But he's probably going to make that team. Should make that team.
Well, yeah, and they got the need too, which obviously is the nice double bonus there. All right, guys. I think we're going to wrap up here. I appreciate both of you guys coming on. You can find Mr. Eric Olinger at Olinger IDP on Twitter. You can find Adam Zekas at AdamTZ. Those are letters. And you can find me at RotoHack. Don't try to pronounce my last name. It's totally fine. Don't worry about it. We're happy to have given a little bit of IDP coverage. We hope to do this a few more times leading up to the season. Thank you both guys for coming on. And, hope everybody has a great week and enjoy the post-draft digestion of information.
Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. Adam, it was good talking to you.
Yep, thanks, Eric and George. Really appreciate it. It's a good time.
Right. I think that's it. So we'll hit stop. I'll hit stop.